What's the belief that people most resist?
When they learn about developing an experimental mindset, they want straight away to go with the big experiment.
How do you cultivate experimental mindset?
You cultivate an experimental mindset by experimenting, by running experiments. Right. It's really an action-based mindset.
How it happened to you actually get connected with Google?
I met someone on the plane who I stayed in touch with, something where you aim for working on big projects with a team at a big company that has a big name to it, a recognizable brand. And Google was offering all of that and much, much more.
Have you ever seen the people with the right mindset but still struggle?
I don't think there's a right mindset. I don't think there's such a thing. I think there is a mindset that matches the demands of your current environment and your current ambitions. And so,
who was Anne before the Anne we know today?
I have always been fascinated with how the brain works. As a child, I didn't even know what neuroscience was, so it wasn't like that. But I was wondering, do you see the same things that I see? Is the blue that I see in the sky the same blue that you're seeing?
What was in your mind and soul as a mission, as a message that you want to spread with your book? How do you define the failure? How do you see failure? What is the result which the most surprise you? How much will you put that this is intuition? How much that it's logic when you're making decisions? Guys, I need to say something. We're building something really special here. The level of guests, the conversations, the depth we are going in week by week, it's becoming better and better, more and more valuable. But there is one thing which doesn't make any sense. Almost 90% of you who keep watching the episodes, who keep coming back week by week, are not subscribed yet. Which means one thing, you're not fully part of that journey. I get it. It's one click. It feels small. But for us, and myself personally, means everything. It tells the algorithm that we matter. It helps us reach bigger guests and create better and better podcast episodes, which at the end of the day are equally for myself like for yourself. They bring the value. So if there was ever a moment to support us, I please you to do it right now. Check if you're subscribed, and if you're not, it's completely free. It doesn't mean to you that much like it means to us. Just click the subscribe button, and by that way, you will help us grow bigger and bigger. And what I can promise you is that me and my team will continue making improves and very soon move ourselves to the real studio where we will record even more powerful episodes with same and new guests. Check, are you subscribed? And subscribe right now. Thank you. Anne-Laure Le Cunff. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Did I? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming today on my podcast show. And you're one of the person with whom I love the most to connect because you're so deep into the neuroscience, into the mindset. But before we speak about Nest Labs, about your book, about Google even, I want to start with the very beginning. Who was Anne before the Anne we know today?
If I think back on my childhood, I think I have always been quite curious, a bit nerdy.
Yeah.
That is something that I brought with me. I would say the Anne-Laure today is probably a little bit more confident and a little bit more ready to follow her interests in a way where she trusts it will bring her to somewhere she wants to go.
Whenever you come to the salesperson will tell you, I know how to help you. We are having perfect solution for you. But in fact, you have a great product, you have a great offer, you know that you can help so many people, but you're still inconsistent. Why it's like that? Because you misunderstand two basic principles. And let me tell you something, it's not economy, it's not war, it's not current president or political situation, none of that. Because simply you and money were always on the same planet Earth. You never left the planet and most likely money never did it, right? The only two ways are the reason why it's like that. Number one thing which can be the reason is that you don't know the right way of presenting your offer. Number two can be that you don't know the proper way to whom to present it, which boils down to you don't know to whom to sell or you don't know the right way to speak to the people to whom to sell. I have been scaling in the past 10 years multiple of my own companies and companies of my clients from zero to $200,000 in sales, being in China, selling physical, perishable items like food and beverages, and without speaking Chinese, without writing Chinese, and without knowing how to sell to Chinese people. But I knew one core principle, and this is that psychology of people never change. So I knew to whom to sell, and I knew exact way how to present my offer to them. I was scaling up my digital businesses to hundred thousands of dollars, again understanding two core principles: to whom to sell, so who can benefit from my offer, and the way, when, and how to present them my offer. And there is no magic and there is no secret behind that. It's really easy to understand it. But in order to this video be very short, I put all of this together in the school community, which is completely for free. You can join it right now, clicking on the link below in the description box, and you can discover these two principles. It will take you a couple of days to figure it out yourself and to practice it, and then your sales will become consistent. Until then, see you in the school community. Bye for now. But what was the moment when you start getting very big interest in how we think and why do we have certain thoughts and how our mind operates? It was in the early age, in the childhood, or later on?
I have always been fascinated with how the brain works in the sense that as a child, I didn't even know what neuroscience was. So it wasn't like that. But I was wondering, do you think the same way I think? Do you see the same things that I see? Is the blue that I see in the sky the same blue that you're seeing? How can we actually test that? But I started my career in a more practical way,
Mhm.
turning to business and technology and starting at Google. And it's only much, much later in life that I went back to university and I actually got to study neuroscience.
Wow, that's beautiful. And you're mentioning here Google. You quite early in your life and career started to work and study in Google. And most of the people would say, okay, that's the end of my career, like top, big performance, I'm done. And you decided to change this. Let's go from the very beginning. How it happened to you actually get connected with Google.
I very much think about my job at Google as a first chapter in my career. So it was
Mhm.
fresh out of university and it was very aligned with all of the kind of like the definition of ambition that I had at the time. Something where you aim for working on big projects with a team at a big company that has a big name to it, a recognizable brand. And Google was offering all of that and much, much more. So you're right to say that a lot of people would work at Google and feel like this is it, right? This is it.
Yeah, it's
This is the top of the wherever you want to go, especially if you're in tech. And I did feel like that for a very long time, actually. So this is how I got started. And in my case, it took a bit of a health scare to realize that maybe actually my priorities were out of whack and maybe I needed a second chapter in my career.
Mhm. Was you feeling any fear when you decided to move away from Google and to start your own entrepreneurship journey through tiny experiments and everything else you later on created?
Yes, of course. There are lots of different fears that are associated, I think, for a lot of people with quitting what is supposed to be your dream job. So one fear at a very, very practical level is a financial fear.
Hmm.
Just thinking about the fact that you are letting go of a good salary, very stable, and all of the security that that brings. So that's one very real fear. Another fear is more identity based.
Mm.
Google is one of those companies that provides a very clear sense of work identity. You can walk into a room at any kind of networking event or at a conference, and you can say, I work at Google, and people will immediately associate you with some characteristics that are associated
Yeah.
with Google. They will think, oh, this person must be smart, they must know what they're doing, they must be working on something that is quite cutting edge, or at least that was the case at the time when I was working there more than a decade ago. And quitting Google meant that all of a sudden I would find myself walking into a room and it was just me and Laura without that label. That was scary too.
But this is very beautiful, actually, because when I see everything what you're doing today, I would say that 100% you made a great decision because you created such a big impact. And this impact is into the field where most of entrepreneurs nowadays can say, okay, we need to pick your brain. We need to see how you think. We need to see all this around your speaking in your book and in your content. And this is about mindset and about tiny experiments, like you named them. So most of people with whom I'm recording here, they're saying to me, Nick, you have to know mindset is 80 to 90% of success. Okay, cool. I'm fine with that. I'm a true believer in that. Let's hear from the expert. What is that thing we called mindset and why it's so important? So please break it down.
Your mindset is really just the way you see and navigate the world. And so when you define it this way, obviously this is going to have a huge impact on your success. So the way you see the world first, what do you think is possible? Your
Mhm.
mindset is going to determine this. And this is going to have an impact on what you even consider, explore, what doors you're going to open in the first place. And then second, how you navigate the world, the actions that you take, your behaviors, your mindset, your sense of self-efficacy, your sense of agency, all of that is also going to have an impact on the actions you take. If you don't believe yourself capable of achieving something, you're never going to even take the first step. And of course, you're not going to achieve it. So a mindset is really a combination of what you think, how you see the world, and what you do, how you navigate the world.
And how it happened to discover experimental mindset? Because this is somewhere where you are very niched down, and it's absolutely brilliant listening to you about that. So give me a little bit of context of this.
After quitting my job at Google and after a few more twists and turns, I ended up going back to university to study neuroscience. And when I went back to university, I was trained in using the scientific method, and I discovered something that I now call the experimental mindset. For me, that was a huge aha moment because my entire career, I had had this definition of success that said that if you want to be successful, you need to
Mhm.
have a clear goal and then you just need to work really hard to get there. So I had worked at companies and startups where we had KPIs and OKRs and performance reviews, and this is how we were measuring success. But scientists have a completely different approach to success. They don't start from a specific destination that they have in mind. They start from a question. They have a hypothesis. They start from a place of curiosity. And they don't have this binary definition of success where you're supposed to get to a specific destination. For them, success is really just learning something new. So when you're a scientist and you're faced with uncertainty, you don't see that as something bad. You see that as something exciting. Uncertainty means that there is an opportunity to experiment and an opportunity to learn something new. And this is what I call an experimental mindset.
Have you ever seen the people with right mindset but still struggle?
I don't think there's a right mindset. I don't think
Okay.
there's such a thing. I think there is a mindset that matches the demands of your current environment and your current
Mhm.
ambitions. And so you can have, for example, a very kind of resilient approach, grit-based approach that can work in certain situations, whereas in other situations, you actually need to be more flexible. You need to try different things. You need to let go a little bit more of what's going to happen next. And kind of even sometimes, which can be really hard for some people, sometimes the best thing to do is nothing just waiting to see how things are going to play out because maybe there are lots of different factors at play. And so I wouldn't say that there's a universally good kind of mindset, the correct mindset to have in all situations. And this is why I prefer talking about having an experimental mindset because it is really always about experimenting with how you behave, how you show up, how you navigate the world based on the factors, the variables that are in your current world.
When you said experimental mindset, I usually like for people like you who are authors and who are very deep into their topic to start for a moment and think, okay, what was the first experiment and how it looked like, which you implement on your own life and on your own mindset?
My very first experiment was a writing experiment. So I discovered when I went back to university to start study neuroscience something that scientists call the generation effect. And the generation effect is a psychological phenomenon that shows that when you create your own version of something, you're going to both understand it and remember it better. So it's
Hmm.
kind of interesting because you're kind of doing it right now by doing a podcast and interviewing people and having those conversations. You're using the generation effect. If anyone is listening to this conversation and taking notes at the same time, that's the generation effect. And so for me, I figured this is really neat. I want to use this. So I said, I'm going to run an experiment and I'm going to write every day about one topic about neuroscience that I'm studying at university. And I'm going to try and explain it in very simple words. No jargon, nothing complicated, no hiding behind complicated explanations. It has to be plain and useful and practical. And that was my first tiny experiment where I said I will write one very short article about neuroscience every day for 100 weekdays. The reason why it was very experimental for me was that, well, first, it was an experiment in the sense that I didn't have a specific outcome. I didn't have a specific goal or a binary definition of success and failure. It was really just about giving it a try and seeing what happens. But also, it was about a topic that was very new to me at the time. So instead of waiting until I felt like I was an expert on everything about the brain, I
Hmm.
said, let me just kind of learn in public and share what I'm learning while I'm learning it. And lastly, I decided to write those articles in English, which is not my first language. And so that was part of the challenge for me as well, trying to see if I could build the sense of self-trust around writing in a language that is not my first language. So that was my first experiment.
And what is the result which the most surprise you? Do you get it?
I would say that the most surprising part is that 5 years later, I'm still going. I'm
Yeah.
still writing my newsletter. I thought it would just be a short experiment. And then at the end of the duration of the experiment, I actually realized that I loved it. Every time I was sitting down to write the newsletter, I actually really, really enjoyed it. And so I kept going. So that's probably the most surprising part. And then another one, well, I don't know if it's more surprising or equally surprising, is that this experiment has turned into a business. And I have a team now, and we have a huge community. It's really become a huge part of my life.
It's really beautiful. It's kind of like what you preach, you did on yourself as well. You see that it worked, you see how it worked, and now you absolutely align your life with things which you're doing in your business. Absolutely beautiful. And you know that most of the people have some sort of limiting beliefs, and this is a part of their mindset. Me personally, growing up in a family where it was just an average people, my mother was working at a local farm and my father was on the construction field. I grew up in a family where two of my limiting beliefs hold me for so long. One was about making decisions, because we were making them always about are they poor, like affordable, or very expensive for rich people in that time. And it took me a lot to break this and to start making them about their outcomes. And the second one was about money. I was thinking that everybody around me don't have money, that everybody around me is poor. But I want to ask you now, after working with so many people, after doing researches and studies, what are the mindset that holds people? and pulling them backwards. What are those types of mindset? And is there any way you discover how easier to we go out away of them, to break them and to create different beliefs?
I tend to talk about these not necessarily in terms of mindsets, but mostly in terms of scripts that people follow automatically.
Okay.
And so, really, it's about making decisions on autopilot, whatever that is, if that ends up being what you just described, poor or rich or whatever that is. But mostly, it's making decisions without intentionality. And in my book, I describe three types of such cognitive scripts that we follow without realizing that we are. So those are kind of like automated autopilot decisions that we have almost like downloaded from society or from our education, our childhood without ever questioning them.
Environment, right?
So the first one, hmm?
Environment, right?
Yes, as part of our environment,
Mhm.
exactly. And because everybody around us is expecting us to make those decisions, we think that those are the right decisions for us and we don't question it. So the first type of cognitive script is what I call the sequel script. And this is when we make decisions today based on the decisions we made in the past. So we want to have a nice narrative. We want it to make sense. So this is when, for example, let's say that you studied a specific topic in university and you only apply for jobs that align with that. You don't look at anything
Mm,
else because it needs to make sense, right? So you
mhm.
limit yourself. Another type of script is the crowd pleaser script. This is when you make decisions based on what you think is going to please other people around you. And those other people could be your spouse, your friends, your colleagues, your parents. And so it might be for some people, maybe becoming a lawyer or a doctor, not because they want to. Some people want to, right? But because this is what is expected from people around them and they think this is going to please the people around them. And the last type of script that I mentioned in the book that I think is the most insidious one is the epic script. It's a little bit like in Hollywood movies. It's the script we follow when we make decisions based on what would be the most impressive. So we feel like whatever we do, it needs to be big, it needs to change the world, and anything less than that is failure. And this is very, very common with startup founders. And again, we limit ourselves in the sense that we tend to put all of our eggs in the same basket. And if we drop that basket, then our entire sense of self-worth crumbles at the same time.
Mm. That's very interesting because in your mind, then, how do you define the failure? How do you see failure?
In
As a,
general,
in general, yeah, is it something as a new experience and just the way for a new beginning, or how do you deal with that if ever happens to you or to somebody around you?
to me, failure is just failure to learn. So as long
Mhm.
as I learn from the experience, there's no really failure. There's no real failure in the traditional sense of the term. And again, I really take inspiration from my work as a scientist and learning from other scientists. If a scientist runs an experiment and they don't get the result they expected, they don't say, "Oh, I'm such a failure," right? Or
Yeah.
this failed, right? They just say, "Huh, okay, this is interesting. This is unexpected. So what can we learn? What happened here? And what knowledge am I going to be able to extract from this result so I can use it in my next experimental cycle, in my next iteration?" So to me, failure is just failure to learn.
Beautiful, because this is probably one of the fundamental base for everybody who is going through life and keep challenging themselves. Because if they accept that what you right now said about failure, this is going to keep them going, not to crash them down. Yeah, you speak a lot about experimental mindset. I would like to ask you, how do you cultivate experimental mindset? How do you see that, and what is your interpretation to the world towards that?
You cultivate an experimental mindset by experimenting, by running
Right?
experiments. It's really an action-based mindset. And the idea really is that anytime you find yourself faced with a challenge, faced with doubt, faced with uncertainty, instead of clinging to the illusion of control, instead of clinging to linear goals, you ask yourself, okay, how can I approach this from a place of curiosity? What can I learn? What kind of experiment can I design here? This is how you
Mhm.
cultivate an experimental mindset.
In your work with tiny experiments, what's the belief or a challenge that people most resist that you found out from the clients?
Well, it's mostly around the scope and the size of the experiments. A lot of
Hmm.
people I work with, they're very ambitious. And so when they learn about developing an experimental mindset, they want straight away to go with the big experiments. They want really
Well,
big, impressive experiments, again, following that epic script. And it takes a little bit of entangling to tell them that you can actually be very ambitious by conducting a series of tiny experiments, and that
mhm.
you don't have to go straight away for the big, impressive experiment. So that is something that I quite often have to insist on.
So in sort of people want a big change immediately to happen, right?
Yes, it just it feels good, and especially if you've been struggling for a while. And I think this is why, a lot of personal and professional development methods are quite popular because they promise you that you will be
Yeah.
able to change everything overnight. And this is not what I'm promising when I'm talking about running tiny experiments. And quite the contrary, I tell people this will take time, it will be iterative, but you can trust that you will get to a place that feels good if you keep on experimenting.
That's beautiful because you're kind of setting a real expectations for people, and they know that it's all based on a long period of time, not an overnight decision making. And that's very beautiful. I love it. Uh, when when we speak about mindset and you as an expert in that, is there a mindset that you personally held for years that quite limited you in some sort of in any field of life?
Well, that would be what I call a linear mindset, which is the opposite of an experimental mindset. So,
Hmm.
really, the idea that in order to be successful, you need to do things in a certain order, that there is a blueprint for success. When I was younger, I spent a lot of time reading blogs and watching videos and listening to interviews, thinking, believing that there was somewhere a recipe that I would find that would finally give me the answer. And if I applied that recipe, then everything would work out. And so the mental model of success that I had was the mental model of a ladder that you climb. And if only I knew the exact steps, the recipe, and the right order, then it would be fine. And with an experimental mindset, which is completely different from a linear mindset, you replace the mental model of a ladder with the mental model of a loop. So you
Mm.
don't have this linear approach to success. And instead, you say, okay, let's start from a question. Let's run through this cycle of experimentation, asking the question, trying something, collecting my data, seeing what happens. And then based on that, I can start another loop and see what happens. So this has been a really big change in terms of mindset for me.
And when you look backwards now and ask yourself, why didn't discover it earlier? What do you think is the main reason for that?
I think I didn't discover it earlier because I was technically successful in a very narrow, linear way. And
Hmm.
so I didn't really question the way I was approaching things. So that's also why I tell people. People tell me, "Oh, so should you completely let go of linear goals? Should you necessarily experiment with everything?" And I tell them, "No, it's not really about experimenting with everything. And if you're really, really clear about what you're trying to achieve and exactly what you want in life, then set a goal and then work hard and just go get it, right?" I would just argue that for most of us, we're not in that situation. We're not quite sure what we want.
Yeah.
We're still figuring it out. It might take our entire life. And what I argue is that this is not a bug. This is not something that needs to be fixed. This is actually part of the beauty of life, that we don't know where we're going and that we will keep on figuring it out. If you're someone who doesn't have a very, very clear idea of exactly what you want your life to look like, then experimentation is a much better approach.
Mm. That's very deep what you're speaking right now, and it pushed me even on thinking, which I will do right after this episode, and start rethinking some of the things in my own life why I haven't seen earlier, but I seen it later. And I mentioned that part of a limiting belief myself was around making decisions. With all your knowledge, which you're having right now, and experience working with people, how does it look like making decisions, that process in your own perspective? How do you make your decisions today? And what is the process you're filtrating them through until you finally said yes, no?
I think about decisions in terms of two time scales. So they are short-term decisions, which I try to adapt quite regularly. And so for that, I conduct a weekly review. I use a
Mhm.
tool that I call plus minus next, which is really, really simple. At the end of each week, I ask myself what went well, first column, with the little plus. Second column, what didn't go so well, with a minus as a symbol in that second column. And then last column with an arrow next. What do I want to tweak next? What do I want to try next? What do I want to focus on next? And so, what is really nice about this is that it allows me to make decisions based on trying to have a bit more of what is in the plus column and a bit less of what is in the minus column. And trusting that if I keep on doing this, even if I don't make the perfect decision every week, it will still keep on improving and I will keep on optimizing the way I spend my time, my energy, and my attention. And again, without needing to make any kind of big decision. So that's kind of at the micro level, week on week, trying to just make slightly better decisions and trying to improve the way I work and the way I live. If I have bigger decisions, typically at the end of an experiment, where I want to know whether I want to keep going with this experiment or if I want to stop or if I need to have a completely different approach, what I find really important in those decisions is to make sure that you consider both the external and the internal signals of success. What I mean by that is that our school system, workplace systems have taught us to focus on the external signals of success. So anything you can put in a dashboard, like the metrics, followers, money, whatever that is, all of these numbers, all of the kind of things that are measurable, as in SMART goals, right? All of that we're really good at measuring. What we haven't been taught to do is to pay attention to the internal signals. How did it feel to conduct this
Mm.
experiment or to work on this project? Because I would argue that if you finish working on something and all of the external signals look good, but you're completely burned out, was that really successful?
Mm.
Probably not. You
In
probably need
my
to change some things.
in my mind, absolutely not, because I'm a big believer that I need to feel good in whatever decision I'm making. And that's exactly leans my next question to ask you. On a scale, how much would you put that this is intuition, how much that it's logic when you're making decisions?
I don't I don't really believe we can make fully logical
Hmm.
decisions. Emotions play such a big role in our decision making processes that none of our decisions are going to be fully logical. The only thing we can really optimize for is self-honesty and self-awareness. And so trying to really pay attention to all of those emotions, all of those more intangible signals that can be hard to pay attention to. And so that's also why I highly recommend practicing metacognition, really thinking about your own thinking, observing your own thoughts, trying to really be aware of your inner world and how that affects your decisions, and knowing that your decisions will never be 100% logical.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Getting well with that. It's part of a solid mindset which set us for eventual, how we call it, failure previously. Um, when you see all your clients, people around you, people close to you, what do you think people misunderstood the most about success?
What I see quite often still is a lot of mimetic desire where people think that they want the same success that other people have. So
Hmm.
they see another entrepreneur who has sold, I don't know, who has a certain amount of annual revenue, or they see an online creator who has a big YouTube channel, or they see an author who sold X number of books. And they think that if this is what success looks like for this person, this is what success should look like for me. And they end up copy pasting goals and definitions of success from other people without ever questioning whether they actually want the success and whether they want to do what it takes to get there. Because we very often only get access to the external outcome. So we hear the person saying, "Oh, we crossed that, we crossed this number of sales, or we crossed this huge milestone." But it doesn't say anything about all of the sacrifices that happened in the background in order to get there. Or is that really what you want to do? Are you willing to make those sacrifices? Is that really what success looks like for you? So this is called mimetic desire, and it's really this idea of wanting what other people want. And I still see very seasoned entrepreneurs and clients, very smart people falling prey to this. And I sometimes still catch myself falling prey to it as well, where I look at my friends, colleagues, other entrepreneurs, other researchers, and I feel like, oh, they did that. I need to do that as well. And I need to catch myself and say, actually, no, I'm okay. I'm really happy for them, but I don't need to have that exact same milestone in order to feel successful.
That's beautiful. With respect to your time, I have two questions more for you. And one of them is you're author of a book, Tiny Experiments. When you wrote that book, when you sat down and said, okay, I finish it, what was in your mind and soul as a mission, as a message that you want to spread with your book?
I mainly want people to experiment more.
Hmm.
The message is that you can be both very ambitious and very curious at the same time. You don't have to let go of your curiosity in order to achieve your ambitions. And you don't have to let go of your ambitions to explore what you're curious about. They're both compatible, and experimentation is a way to bring them together.
That's very beautiful. For the very last, I just want to let this roll to you and to you spread a message to everybody who listen to us either on audio or on video. What is the message you want to left them with out of this episode?
I'd like to leave them with a question, actually, which
Go
is,
ahead.
what will be the first experiment you will run after listening to this episode or watching it?
Wow, that's very beautiful one. Thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your wisdom today with me. I really appreciate you. And to everybody who listen, I would like also to hear you in the comments below sections on any platform you're listening or watching. It will be very good to see how you run your own tiny experiments. And thank you so much. It was such a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you.